Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment, and today we will cover methods for socioeconomic impacts and under the larger ambit of methods under EIA. So accordingly, our coverage would include that we'll first look at definitions and concepts of socioeconomic and impact assessments. Then we'll look at what are the key aspects when we undertake scoping pertaining to socioeconomic impact assessment. Then we'll similarly look at what we undertake and how do we go about baseline studies. Then we'll look at how we undertake impact prediction and evaluation, and we'll look at direct and indirect impacts of it. And then we'll look at like how do we assess the significance of socioeconomic impact. So we'll be doing this in two parts. So today we'll cover the first part of it. So looking at the learning outcomes, so what is expected out of you after you complete the session is that you would be able to define the related concepts in here. And then you should be able to identify the items to be covered in scoping, and then you should be able to similarly identify what you should cover in baseline studies and how do you approach that. Further, you should be able to identify various possible impacts which are possible in this domain, and then look at various data sources, methods which are involved in predicting and evaluating impacts, and how you should be able to discuss and identify various steps involved in assessing significance. So that is what learning outcome is expected from you. So looking at the definitions and concepts of socio-economic impact assessments, it's this particular domain developed in 1970s, 1980s, and it developed majorly in the context of like nuclear power stations in US and like hydroelectrical schemes in Canada and other parts of UK. So that's the context where it started with. And there's still ongoing debates, like how you saw with the health impact assessment, like whether socioeconomic impact assessment should be part of EIA or should be independent study in itself. So that goes on, and it's been approached in different ways. So now looking at the definitions of SIA, so there's some key definitions we'll look at just to understand what it really means and what's the scope of it. So SIA is said to be estimating and appraising of the conditions, like what's happening, of the way the society is organized and is changed by what kind of project which is going to come up. So that is said to be SIA. Likewise, we see another definition which says that SIA, the assessment, is systematic advanced appraisal of the impacts of day-to-day quality of life. So it's very simple how it affects people's life and communities when the environment is affected by development or policy change. So what really happens to their day-to-day life because of the changes in the environment, because of the project which is going to come up. So likewise, we see another definition by Inter-Organizational Committee Guidelines and Principle for Social Impact Assessments. We see that it talks about consequences, what kind of consequences will happen to human population of any public or private actions that alter ways in which people live, work, play, like again addressing to day-to-day aspect of life, and how do they meet their needs and generally cope as a member of society. So it also addresses to the stress elements, like it's talking about cope as a member of society. So you see how wide the domain is, and it's mostly dealing with the softer part of the society here. So you can look at this guidelines and principle for social impact assessments, and I've also given you the link so that you can have a detailed look at it if you like to do that. So we see another definition. So by IAIA in the guidelines which they have come up with, and if you'll recollect, we saw this part in legislation aspect time also when we were covering that. So how do they define it? What do they talk about? So we see that they call SIA as a process of analyzing. So you're looking at the aspects and then also looking at the monitoring and managing the intended and unintended social consequences. So there are certain things you are doing intentionally trying to bring change, but then there would be certain changes which would be unintended. And further, it talks about both positive and negative of the planned intervention. And it's again not just talking about the physical component of the project, but also the policies, program, plans, project, and any social change processes resulting because of those kind of intervention. So you see that the primary purpose, the key purpose of this process of analyzing is to understand or to target for a more sustainable and equitable biophysical and human environment. So the main goal is, again, as we have been seeing, is the Sustainable Development Goal, equitable development. So I've also given you the link to this particular report here. So if you look at from one of our manual, then we see that social impact assessment from this I have taken from MOEFCC site. So it talks about social impact assessments as an instrument for the purpose of analyzing the kind of social issues, and it argues or it propagates the idea to undertake stakeholders' view for the design of the project. So how you really engage with them and take their consideration into the design of the project. Social assessment helps make the project aligned with the social development concerns, and then looking into improving improving the conditions of particularly the poor, vulnerable people, and trying to minimize and mitigate risk and any kind of negative impact. So through this process, you analyze the distributional impact. We have seen that any kind of impact would be not universal. It would be positive for somebody, negative for somebody, weaker for somebody, very strong impact for somebody. So to analyze the distributional impact of the project, what you're targeting at, and then how you would take care and engage with the stakeholders and identify differences in what kind of assets and capacity they have to take the benefit of the project. Another example I have taken from Mumbai Metro Line 3. So you can see here, this is done by Maple. There's a social impact assessment report created for JICA, for the funding agency. So here you can see how they have undertaken the entire SIA process. Here you can see the approach and methodology which they have adopted. Like they're undertaking the desk research, and then they are also undertaking the field study, then they are undertaking the data analysis, and then report has been prepared, and the draft report, and then review is being done. So you can see that this is one independent social impact assessment report along with the complete project report, which has been done for the funding purpose. So here you can see what kind of approach. So you can see a lot of similarity in what we have been seeing in all the methods section. So here I have put another snip for you where you can see that the IUCN also gives you another guidance on social impact assessments. You can look at various aspects of assessment like methodology, how do you analyze the alternatives and look at the environmental and social management plan, and then how do you undertake these stakeholders consultation, and how do you take care of the resettlement, voluntary and involuntary, and how do you take care of the indigenous people. And they also specify methodology for data collection and impact analysis. So the data collection methods and analytical tools. So you mostly in this particular segment, you will see qualitative data is much more used, and then you take combination of data as well, qualitative and quantitative, and you have mix of data and different units of analysis. And what is really suggested is triangulation of results. And when I say triangulation of results, means trying different methods, looking at different data, and trying to draw conclusions and see whether those conclusions are reinforcing your finding or not. So if from every angle, if you see every approach method, if you see, and if it points to the same aspect, like then you would consider that to be your strong conclusion. And then the unit of analysis can also vary in this. You can see that here example, it calls for households level, community level, and other social aggregation also you can do. And then it also talks about what kind of sampling you can do. So kind of different criterias you can adopt. So there's a lot of complete distinct domain also where you can look at how this social aspects are reviewed, how the analysis is come in. That's a very well established domain. Then we are going to focus a little on the environmental impact side. How do we integrate it with that? So that was a little brief on the methodology part here. So now moving on and looking at the scoping components. So looking at the scoping aspects, so we see that as per the IAIA guidance, we are required to look at what kind of issues are associated with planned interventions and what are those concerns of the common people, the local people, and what kind of impact would happen to them directly or indirectly. So all those aspects you have to see, and you have to see one, you're going to find out what are the concerns, and then you're going to cover not only like a very formal system, but then you would also look into the experiences of what they feel and the felt experience, even in terms of even if they are perceiving or even if they are actually feeling it, having a sense of it. So all these aspects, the tangible and intangible and relatively softer aspects, are also covered when you look at this. So you need to determine while doing scoping to what extent you're going to go, but then usually you would also have to take into consideration, even if it is perception, like the people perceive that this benefit is going to happen, or even if they perceive this negative impact is going to happen to them whenever industry comes up, they might think that they might get job, or they might think they might have to remove, or it might impact their way of life. So even if they are perceiving and if it might not really translate into facts, then also you need to undertake all those consideration while you are doing it. So whether you will take it or not, that you will determine in your scoping stage. And then you, at this stage, you would also find out what level you're going to work on. So when you're dealing with socioeconomic things, you can work at the individual level also, the individual person level, like, and then you can also work at an economic unit level, like you can look at the family level or household level. Then you can also decide to look at the social group level, like like particular community groups, and then you can also look at the workplace, like company, governmental agencies, and you can also look at the community, society in general, or the larger. So you might not have a fine granular details, but you can decide to go on a broader aspect also. So that is what you really decide at the scoping level. So when you look at these different levels, you will see that there are impacts at different levels, and the impact might also vary, and the effect might also vary. And that can be different from one person to another person. So while you're undertaking socioeconomic impact in EIA, then it is very important for you to clarify at the stage of scoping, like what type of impact is going to happen, what will be the duration of impact, to what geographical area you're going to study, and what will be the distribution of impact. And in order to understand this, you need to ask questions like what to include, what all we will as a team cover within this, over what periods of time our analysis would take place, what kind of data we'll collect, what kind of geographical area will take immediate footprint or larger footprint, and whom we're going to look at, because there'll be a range of people involved in and around the project, so whom you really need to focus, that all decisions, questions you have to make, and decisions you have to take. So if you look at what to include, you can see in this particular diagram, there are certain examples related with socioeconomic impact assessments. So you have direct economic impact, such as you can have local employment, or you can also have non-local employment. So it is quite possible that in your project you're saying that local employment will be created, but then that's quite possible that no local job is created. Further, it is also quite possible that you're creating a setup where you will be bringing migration would be happening. So what economic impact is happening, whether it's local or it's non-local, what kind of employment is generated. Then what is the characteristic of employment, whether it is a skilled group, unskilled group, or highly skilled group, and do you have labor supply and training available in this, and what's the level of wage in that area. Then you can also look at the indirect wider economic expenditure, and for that you can look at the employees, how much they spend. So maybe that spending rate might increase, and then look at what kind of supply chain is there, and what's the labor market pressure there, are the human resources available or not, and then what kind, how the economy works there, what kind of multiplier effects are there, and then what can really happen, what are the potential of that area for to take the effect, what kind of what will happen to that area, what's the capacity of that area to take different effects. Then you would also look at the demographic aspects. So what is the change in population size, temporary and permanent. You can look into change in other population characteristics, like what will happen to the family size, income level, socioeconomic groups, settlement patterns, and then what would happen. Like now, you could also look at the housing, various housing, what types of housing are there, public and private housing, house prices, what is that, the rent might go up or go down, what will happen to homelessness and other housing problems. So that all you can see in this. And then other services also, you can look at the public and private sector services, what what impact it can have on the educational services, health services, and safety and other support system. and what will happen to the local finances, the urban governances, finances to take care of it when there is a increase in population or increase in the activity in your area. Likewise, you can also look at the socio-cultural aspects. You might include that. You might include the lifestyle, quality of life, gender issues, social problems, community stress and conflicts, and community character, how that character or the image would really change. It can happen both in negative and positive manner. And then you may also include the distributional effects, which means the effect on specific groups. So you're not just looking at the umbrella effects, but you can also look at how the impact would be on individual groups. So you can look at, by the virtue of gender, what might happen to women with that kind of change. Will it be positive or negative? Will it make them much more vulnerable? What will happen with different age, religion, language, ethnicity, and location? So that all that aspect can be seen. So here in the diagram, you can see the example of this project, and then you can see how it generates expenditure on the local goods and services. It can make it expensive or cheaper. Then you can have direct employment effect, local, and then you can also have in migrants. Then you can also have the monitoring, which will take around the place. So direct employment effect can also have effect on the local services. It can have effect on the accommodation, the housing requirements, and then altogether can have a wider economic impact. So when you're looking at like local area, then the socioeconomic impact can also happen at the wider regional level or national level as well. So we're going to look at briefly this again, the Metro Line 3 proposal from Mumbai, the social impact assessment aspect here. So you can see in this case that they have proposed a metro rail which will facilitate commuters, the travelers, to travel from South Mumbai to airport via Mahim Bandra Kurla complex. So you can see that plane there, and then that's southern Mumbai connecting to the airport here. So this report is about that. So in the scoping stage, you would also determine the time period of all the stages of the project in particular. Even if you are looking at the distributional effect, then you also need to see at what phase, what time period those impacts would happen. So it can happen at the operational stage. It can also happen in decommissioning stage. So when the industries fall out, no longer work, then also it has a lot of negative impact when it shuts down. So we often don't look at it, but one needs to look at it at the operational phase, construction phase, decommissioning phase. And then at the scoping stage, you also need to look at the geographical extent to cover. So you have to identify the impact zone, and then that also you will identify phase-wise, like what will be the impact zone during construction, what will be the impact zone during the operation, what will be the impact zone during the decommissioning of the project. And all this needs to be undertaken, but it will also depend on the availability of data, what kind of policy environment is there. So that all will guide. And further, in the scoping, you also need to identify affected people. So who will be the affected people? Will it be the local people? Will it be the people visiting like tourists? And then how, whether it will be elderly people affected or young people affected, or whether it's women who are affected. So World Bank provides you in this direction identification of different like groups which can be of concerns, and especially of concerns from EIA perspective. So you can see communities. It identifies the term communities, where it refers to diverse group of people. And then it also emphasizes to recognize the ethnic tribal groups, and then also look at different occupational groups, skill-wise, education-wise, look at the different occupational groups, and then look at the socioeconomic groups as well, and look at age and gender. So this World Bank also provides you, um, and it's key from the EIA perspective. So here you can see from the Mumbai Metro Line 3 examples, you can see how they have identified vulnerable population, community resources, and you can see the source of data is from census. And then other you can see is they have identified vulnerable population as families as scheduled caste, tribes, below poverty line families, women-headed households like widows, destitute women, unmarried, or spinsters. And also vulnerable group, they have included people above 65 age, and also included physically challenged individuals. So you see how they have tried to identify groups, so that might vary with context to context and also depend on what kind of data which is available. And then you're also looking at how it is impacting the community resources. Apart from this, you might also have to consider while looking at these, while dealing with scoping, like whether the impact would be positive or would be negative, and then whether it will be reversible or irreversible, whether it will be quantitative or qualitative. Can you capture that in a qualitative manner, or can you capture in a quantitative manner? And then you also need to look at what is the actual impact and what is the perceived impact. So that all also need to be considered. And many a times there is both kind of like actual is there, but then even the perceived impact influences the success of a project, or how the future projects are accepted, or what's the behavior of the local people towards the development. So those things are also important, and so that has to be taken care of. And then when you look at the perceived impact, it's more subjective. And when you look at actual, that's more objective assessment, what we do. So that was about scoping. Then now looking at the baseline studies. So if we try to understand socioeconomic impact, it is like, it is said to be the interaction between like what development activities will happen, what kind of actions will be taken because of that. Its interaction, its multiplication with the kind of the characteristic of the host environment. And it is said that it's important that you try to collect data of both these aspects, like what is the project activities, project related, what's the character of the project, and what's the character of the host environment, and how those are going to interact. So you need to collect that data, and you need to see what will really happen. So that is what is targeted as the baseline study. Here you can see in the diagram, they have projected the labor requirements for a project, and how they are looking at the disaggregated data as per the time and by employment category. So you can see like how the during the construction staffing, how year wise, how the staff would be time wise. And then you are looking at lower parts of the graph, you can see industrial staff, managerial staff, clerical and administrative staff. So also year wise, how those variation would also be there. So you can see how the top one, industrial staff, are varying, and then clerical staff also you can look at. So that kind of data you have to look at. And whenever you're dealing with SIA, so there can be a difference in opinion what the impact would be. So you can see quoted from one of the London Gateway Bridge example. So the purpose was to link the two ends, and can improve the connectivity. And the argument was that it would give benefit to the local residents and being able to cross the river, and then that would increase their employment opportunity. The other, like the cross argument, was that bridge would not really improve the economic condition of the people unless people are trained or built to take the benefit of that, whatever is created, whatever opportunity is created. So that might stand true. Think of all the cases where you have come up with, where really when the projects come up, how much jobs the local people really get. And often you will find that the local people are not trained enough, there's no enough capacity building done, or education level is not there, then they really do not get good employment opportunity. So though intentions of the project can be good, but then there can be problems with the way they are designed for engaging with the local people. And some projects may have significance in terms of national and even international employment implications. And job creation can happen at different stages and scale also, like the construction stage and so on. So while also looking at the characteristic of the host environment, we'll also look in the second part of the lecture, like we'll look at certain examples. But right now, just to look at briefly looking at some of the methods, how to look at the characteristic of host environment. The most suggested approach to this is to go for a triangulation method. That means, as I had already explained, that you look into variety of data source. So you don't draw conclusion from just one source, but you look at variety of data sources and you investigate from different angles. And then if you are getting the same kind of scenario, then you can draw conclusions from that. So not only for that numbers, but you also look for the theory part of it. And you like how the people are, what kind of problems are there. And then you do not look also for theory from one angle, but you also have multiple perspective, means you look at the same social conditions from different people's perspective. And then it is suggested to use multiple methods, and its public participation is key to develop the characteristic of the host environment. So it should not be that the researchers and the team working on it develop the characteristic of the host environment, but it should also come from people's opinion of themselves, like what do they think about their socioeconomic situation, or how do they experience about it. And the possible data source, which are standardly used for this, is UN International Labour Organization, ILO data, labor statistics, and they also provide you occupational classifications, which you can see. There's also, at the Indian level, you can also find National Statistical Commissions, and then also Census of India gives you a lot of information. So I've also given you the link to explore the data. Here you can see from, again, the Mumbai case, how they have explored the socioeconomic characteristics of Mumbai, like looking at the area, population, male, female, scheduled caste, scheduled types. And then their source of data is Census of India 2011, from which they have created this profile characteristic of the host environment. So you also find some of the international sources. So we have already seen the ILO. And then you also have ILO Stat, which provides like updated labor data. And they are using 100 indicators, and they capture data from 165 countries. So I've given you that link as well to explore. Then you also have key indicators of labor market, KILM, and it's also a multifunctional research tool, and it's also done by ILO Department of Statistics. So they also use certain sets of country level data and then indicators, like 17 key indicators for labor market. So you can also look at that, and they cover topics like labor force participation, employment, hours of working, what's the share of unemployment, what's the scenario about wages, what's the scenario about labor productivity and income distribution, and so on. So you can look at it. So I've given you a link to this as well. And then you also have a labor force survey. So This also keeps compiling the website and it keeps the data statistic all available. So I've given you a link to that as well, so you can have a look at that. And when you're looking at these aspects, you need to look at what are the kind of direct and indirect jobs which are going to come up. So then what will be your key questions for which you will try to find out answer? So you will look at the kind and number of jobs will be created, what kind of job will be created for the local people, what kind of job will be created for the in-migrant workers, and what will be the scale of magnitude of indirect and induced employment because of the development, to what scale it will happen, what will be the share of that, and then what will be the proportion of those jobs getting filled by the local people. So if there are 100 jobs created, how many jobs will be created for local people? 1, 2, or 30, 40 out of 100. So you need to also understand those kind of proportion. And will it help local businesses, it will help them boost the local business, or it is if a mall is coming, it is quite possible that the local business struggle to cope up with the new environment. And if there's an industry coming up, then maybe they are getting more opportunity to sell their products and services. So those kind of things can happen. So you need to have a look at what's really happening. Now looking at the impact prediction and evaluation. So looking at direct and indirect employment impact. So we're just going to look at the economic aspect in this section. So impact prediction and evaluation. In this, you need to look at what will be the nature of your prediction, and how consistent, what kind of prediction methods you're going to use. And then you'll also look at what are the direct and indirect impact. So indirect predictive approach. So when you are doing indirect predictive approach, that means you're not sure, but you're assuming what is going to happen in future. So then you use extrapolative method. So you may pay attention to this extrapolative method. So you look at the past trends, what happened 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line, and then based on that, you present the present data, and then you project the scenario, what kind of things will happen in future. So that's extrapolative method. And another method is a normative method. And when we say normatives, based on the norms or the standard. So such methods work backward. So whatever is the standard, if the local policy says that if the development is coming, 30% of job has to be given to the local people. So you would be working on the reverse background. So you'll follow the norm and you will back calculate how many jobs you really need to create for the local people. So that would be normative method. And then the other method would be cause-effect relationship. And you will be looking at different aspects which will be involved. So here you can see one of the diagram, causal effect diagram for local socioeconomic impact, and with the example of power stations. So you look at like the arrows going to expenditure on goods and services. So that would lead to economic opportunity, percentage spent in the local area, purchases of local goods and services, and downstream effects on local services, local supply chain. So is it creating pressure or it's boosting the economy, local economy? That you have to see. Likewise, on the right hand side, you can see the labor requirement, and then like home-based recruitment ratios, what's happening, direct employment, and then direct employment for non-home based workers, and so on. So that is how you would look at causal effect. You can also create causal effect diagrams and try to understand indirect jobs which would be created. Further, while predicting local and or regional direct employment impact, so for that you can simply calculate with the number of jobs that would be created. Further, you can also look into the disaggregation of different project stages, like at different location, different time period, what kind of jobs will be created. So here in the table, you can again look at another example. So you look at total labor requirement, and then how much proportion of that will be the local labor, and how much proportion of the same total jobs would be non-local labor recruitment. And then you see, look at the range of jobs: site service, security, professional supervisory, civil operators, mechanical and electrical operatives. And then you see how with like change in the positions, the percentage of local labor also reduces or varies. You can see that, and how non-local labor increases when the mechanical electrical operatives things are coming. So you can see 10, 85, 45, 60, 56. So the proportion is increasing as the different level of your skills which are required. So that's also said to be problems in a lot of places where eventually training and capacity buildings are not there. So local people cannot really take benefit of the vertical upliftment which people can have. So that's the narrower topic within economic impact, but you can also capture the wider economic impacts. So now looking at how do we measure wider economic impacts, and then one of like what kind of multiplier effect would happen. So you take multiplier approach. So there are three methods which you see. One is economic base multiplier model, and then the other is the input output model, and then you have Keynesian multiplier. We have seen this before also. So the when we look at economic base multiplier, the idea of this is based on that you divide the local economic into basic and non-basic activities. So you see that basic activities include local regional supporters activities, and is seen as like the basic activity will lead to another kind of activities, would trigger other kind of activities. So whatever the hardcore activity which will happen because of that particular project, so that would be the basic activity, and that would lead to another non-basic activities, and that would be the regional dependent activities. So which would support the population related, aligned with those basic activities. And it could be like commercial activities, services, and things like that. So the ratio of basic to non-basic activities, usually measured in employment terms, is used for the prediction purpose. So then you see that if there is a certain number of increase in the employment, then it will generate Y amount of non-basic employment. So this is the way it is calculated. So you have certain proportion which goes with it, and this model also have certain limitation and advantages. The other method is input-output model. So input-output table. In this, you have a balancing matrix of financial transaction between industries or sectors. So you look at that. So here you can see the input-output, how they are working it out. So in this example, you can see input-output analysis to look at the socioeconomic impact from the airport project. So you can see here how they are assessing here. So you can see economic input, industrial final demand. So what kind of demand would be there? So industrial gross output will happen. And because of that, you'll have in-migration, and then you see that there'll be regional employment, income from employment would come, and then it will again link there. And then because of the regional employment, there would be short-term unemployment would reduce, and then that would lead to benefits paid to short-term unemployed. So you can take care of that as well. And then regional employment, you can see that it would also link to long-term unemployment and inactive. So it would also reduce that, and that would also lead to positive impact of benefits paid to long-term unemployment, and that would also improve the regional labor supply and so on. So you can see here, so this is also the input output way. Also you can understand what kind of multiplier impact can happen. So these ways also it is shown. Then you have Keynesian multiplier. So the basic theory behind this is that whenever money is invested into an economy in a place at the national or regional level, then it allows facilitated increase in the income, and that creates a lot of positive aspects. So you can see that in this simple formula where YR is the change in the level of income in the region, and J is the initial income injection, so how much money you're investing through that particular project, and KR is the regional income multiplier. So what's its potential to multiply that? Based on that, it will calculate the change in the level of income in the region. So if the initial injection of money is given, and if you see that usually it might multiply theoretically, might multiply at every level, then it can have infinite positive impact. But that's not true, but there are a lot of leakages which happen in the system. So, and just to trying to understand what does leakages means. So there are certain types of leakages. So proportion of additional income saved, so people will not really spend, they might save. And then a proportion of additional income paid in direct taxation, the taxation would increase. Proportion of additional income spent on imported goods, they might not really buy things from the local economy but to get imported goods. Then they can also have marginal transfer benefits to their they would send it home, the money to their own native places. And then proportion of additional consumption expenditure on local goods, which goes on indirect taxation also. So those kind of leakages can also happen. So usually those all are summated and divided in the formula. So that ways you can have a realistic estimation of that. So you can also see here another summary of the economic impact. So how they are calculating, indicating direct, indirect, and induced impact. In this particular case, you can see what's the GDP, taxes, number of jobs, what's the output which is happening here. So now looking at the assessing the significance. So there's no standard in this domain to recognize what's the significance. So a lot of judgments are made. So and it also depends on the political and arbitrary scenario. And one can have threshold or steps, what kind of changes are taking place, and then look at it in a comprehensive manner. So depending on the sensitive area, how are the receptors, you make those decisions. And usually the how higher sensitive people would work and low sensitive people will work. So you can look at another example here. So you can see the change in local population level and a negligible impact, slight impact, moderate impact, major impact. So how you can make the judgment and look at it. So that's the example here. So that was what we saw in this. We majorly looked at the economic aspect, and in another part we'll look at the social aspect. So today we covered the concepts of social impact assessment. Then we identified how we undertake scoping. Then we looked at the baseline studies. And then we looked at the impact prediction and evaluation aspect, what kind of direct and indirect impact would happen. And then we looked at how we assess the significance. So these were our key references. And these are the suggested watch and read, which you can look at. Please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have. Do share your opinions, experiences, and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring AI. Thank you.